Hello and welcome to Teachings in Education, Lesson Planning. What components are required in lesson planning? A teacher's lesson plan should include, at the very least, these 12 different components. The first necessary component is the title. When naming your lesson plans, begin with the course subject, grade level, and your name. The title should be clearly presented somewhere at the top of the lesson plan. It should be easy for administrators to recognize whose lesson plan it is. Next up, the date, which is more important than you actually think. Teachers will not argue that one of the most common mistakes are using old lesson plans and forgetting to change the date. It happens to me all the time. When teachers get caught using older dates, it indicates they are not actually planning their lesson. The third component is the lesson objective. Each lesson should have a learning goal. The goal should be characterized as SMART, which means it's specific, measurable, achievable, results-focused, and time-bound. These learning goals should be posted somewhere in the class for both students and administrators to view. The next component is the standards, which is quite an important component. Lesson plans must be tied to at least one state standard. Teaching to the state standards is important because your students will eventually take standardized tests. And if you haven't covered your standards, you eventually set your students up for failure. Moving on to the fifth component, which is the actual plan for the lesson. Each lesson should have a beginning, a middle, and an ending. You should also write in the sequence of activities and events in your lesson. For example, maybe your plan begins with an anticipatory set, then a lecture, then an activity, and finishes up with an assessment. The sixth component of lesson planning is the assessment. Remember, each lesson objective with its aligned standard must be assessed for student comprehension and understanding. Now, when I say assessment, that can mean something as simple as a quick formative assessment, such as an exit ticket, or perhaps a unit assessment. The next component has been surrounded by some debate lately: homework. Let me be the first to say that homework is absolutely necessary. Add specific pages and problems for homework assignments. You know, kids spending time doing their homework isn't a bad thing. You should be assigning homework. The next part of lesson planning is to add some cross-curriculum standards. English language arts and other subject standards should be included when touched upon in a lesson. Especially look to incorporate English language arts. Think about a physics lesson on quantum mechanics and Albert Einstein. That lesson could have both history and science standards. The next component is differentiation, which great teachers actually do. You can include differentiation of instruction through content, process, and product. Also, differentiate for students with disabilities and ELL students as well. It should be noted that differentiation of instruction takes a lot of time and effort as well as planning. The 10th component is technology. Add technology skills and practices into your lesson plan if possible. Now, not all lessons you give will incorporate technology. Nevertheless, as teachers, we must prepare students for the technological world. The next component should be included is the written component. Remember, writing is a transferable skill that students need for most disciplines and need as career professionals. Even if you're teaching math, have your students write out steps to solving a problem. Place open-ended questions in your assessments. And now, we finally made it to the last component: career skills and career-ready practices. All teachers should try to instill career-ready practices that will prepare their students for careers later on in life. Education is ultimately the responsibility for preparing students for life outside of school.
Ever wondered why you're able to pick up certain skills or concepts more quickly or easily compared to others? Have you ever been jealous that your friend is able to learn languages, for example, faster than you no matter what you seem to try? This is because everyone has a natural inclination towards certain skills, and they gravitate towards activities and professions that complement those skills. This can also be attributed to one's unique learning style, where abilities that work well with a certain learning style might be grasped and retained faster compared to others. Today, we'll briefly look at a common model for grouping these different styles together called the VARK model, so stay tuned. Neil Fleming, an education inspector from New Zealand, took his experience working with schools to research education and learning at Lincoln University. Beginning with the work that American Walter Burke-Barb and his colleagues began with the VARK model, where the learning styles or modalities are broken down into visual, auditory, and kinesthetic, as well as the representational systems and neuro-linguistic programming, Fleming refined the definition of a visual learner to include an additional group, the read-write group. This type of learner is someone who responds well to visual aids, but not necessarily respond well to visual aids of the written word, and these lack the color and shape cues. Through his work, his team developed a questionnaire to help identify an individual's learning style. To help us illustrate the differences between each learning style in the VARK model, let's create a simple scenario. Teach someone how to get to the post office to mail a letter. Here is our visual learner. Someone with this learning style performs best when given visual media to understand a concept. While this does not include still images or photographs, these may include maps, diagrams, graphs, charts, and through the use of symbols. For symbols, let's take a closer look at our map. Right now, it looks a little empty, but by adding symbols, shapes, and arrows, we can create reference points for our student to more clearly visualize where they are and where they need to go in order to get to the post office. Now let's meet our auditory learner. This type of learner does their best when learning from spoken sources such as lectures and group discussion, as well as digital audio sources such as radio or podcasts. Certain written media such as web chat and email could be grouped here as well, since it is more commonly written in a non-formal way that is similar to speaking. Another way an auditory learner can learn more successfully is when they hear something someone has said, rearrange it in their own words, and then saying it out loud to confirm their understanding. A simple example could be if our student asks our teacher, "What time is it?" The teacher might reply, "1:30." In the student's mind, he might rephrase it to 1:30, since that is the way he would normally say it, and then ask his teacher to check if it is correct. The boy now has full understanding of the information the teacher gave to him by learning through speaking out loud in his own way. To help our student learn how to get to the post office, he will be most successful if we provide clear verbal instructions and allow time in case he wants to confirm details of what we have said. Our read-write learner prefers information displayed in words. This is a common modality amongst teachers and students, and being able to read and write well is often a trait that is looked at when graduates are applying for jobs. Read-write learners do well with learning from lists, diaries, dictionaries, and from the internet, among others. By giving our student a written list of directions, they will be able to understand more easily how to get to the post office. Now we have arrived at our final modality, the kinesthetic learner. These types of learners learn best through action. These can either be performed directly, observed, or through simulation, but what is essential is that it feels real, that there is a sense of reality or concrete nature to the example. In order to best learn how to get to the post office, our student might ask the teacher what other shops are near the post office. The teacher might reply, "It is across the street from the coffee shop." Our student then cycles through his memories and recalls a time he went to the coffee shop with his mother. Using this prior experience, the student begins to fit the pieces of the puzzle together and is able to figure out how to get to the post office. Although the teacher's answer triggered the student's memory, what the teacher said is less important in allowing the student to gain understanding. It was our student using that memory to recall where the coffee shop is and how to get there, and then building upon that past experience to apply it to the new task of going to the post office. We've finally arrived at the post office, and as we can see, all our learners have arrived. While we all might learn differently and have our own unique strengths, by adapting how we approach figuring out a task, we can all be successful together. Now you might be asking, but what if I'm somewhere in between these learning styles? Or I find that I am a different learning style depending on what I am learning. Where do I fit? The VARK model accounts for this through the use of multimodality. Life is complex, and so are we. and often a given task might be completed most effectively through mixing these styles. In the VARK model, there are two types of multimodalities. For VARK Type 1, these learners select one of their modalities that they are most comfortable with in a context-specific manner. VARK Type 2 differentiates itself from Type 1 in that Type 2 learners require that all of their learning styles must be utilized before they are able to complete a given task. These learners might be seen as slower as they gather information in different ways, or may appear to procrastinate. Although some may view this as negative, however, it is often the case that these learners are able to solve problems more effectively since they have a greater understanding of the task, having looked at it using different learning techniques.
Eat your brain. Weighing in at about 3 pounds, this single organ accounts for about 20% of your body's blood, oxygen, and energy usage. The brain houses 100 billion neurons, with each neuron having somewhere between 1,000 and 10,000 synapses, or connections to other neurons. Every thought, every action, and every memory is managed and stored in these neural pathways. What does this mean? Well, every brain is unique and uniquely organized. Yet historically, schools have educated students as if they had identical brains. In the drive to ensure standardized accountability, education has sought not to facilitate learning, but conformity. As the establishment of education systematically disassembles our students' creativity and motivation, students engage with new learning less and less and are not retaining learning in long-term memory. So how do we, the educators, design learning to facilitate this ultimate goal of long-term memory penetration? Well, we have to begin by hijacking their brains. There are basically two ways to do this: by providing the brain with a pleasurable experience or a painful one. Unfortunately, the more powerful of the two is pain. A teacher can prepare the most incredibly engaging lesson ever, but if the student is experiencing physical, social, or emotional pain, the pain will hold their attention rather than the learning. To stop this from happening, we must begin by ensuring that each student has a safe, risk-free learning environment. So that leaves pleasure as the best way to engage the brains of our students. To make learning pleasurable, it must be relevant, meaningful, and enjoyable. So just ask yourself one simple question: would I enjoy sitting in my class all day, every day? But remember, every brain is unique. Therefore, when introducing new information, teachers must provide students with multiple entry points to the learning. This means drawing upon students' interests, prior knowledge, and past experiences. Then, students often need multiple solution paths to connect with the new learning. When new information is introduced, the brain has to find a way to reconcile it with prior learning. This process is called cognitive conflict. Teachers often try to shield their students from cognitive conflict because the process can be frustrating. But to truly ensure that the information is mastered, students must be allowed to struggle and resolve their cognitive conflict. So how do we motivate students to endure this struggle? Well, research into cognitive psychology tells us that there are 3 key ingredients to intrinsic motivation. The first is autonomy. Giving students opportunities to make meaningful choices during the learning process gives them a sense of empowerment. The second is connection. This ingredient has 2 pieces. Students need to connect to each other collaboratively and also to the real world. This satisfies a relational need in the brain that helps motivate students. The third is the pursuit of curiosity in the progression towards mastery. This requires a balance between 2 variables, challenge and ability. If the challenge is low and ability is high, the brain becomes bored. If a challenge is too high and the ability is too low, the brain becomes stressed. A balance is needed between the 2. And when the brain finds a challenge that is perfectly balanced with ability, the result is called flow. and it is the most intense enjoyment of learning that the brain can experience. When the three ingredients of autonomy, connection, and progression towards mastery are mixed together in the brain, the result is a storm of motivation. But the brain still has two other key needs to be able to struggle through and resolve cognitive conflict. The first is activity. If the brain encounters new information in a passive state, the result is passive learning, which has little chance of being encoded in long-term memory. By activating the student's biology through movement and multisensory experience, the brain begins to experience active learning, which is much more memorable. The final ingredient for long-term memory learning is self-reflection. This is the pillar that sustains the student through the struggles of cognitive conflict to translate learning to long-term memory. When these brain-compatible strategies are applied every day in every class, the result becomes exponential. With each passing year, students recall more and more prior learning from long-term memory, and the cycle of learning only grows.
That's it, we're done, folks. Let's get off on this exit here and continue to drive safe. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and stay up to date with some training information. Charles McNamara here. Hope you enjoyed this training video.